So I'm going to invite Emily up to speak to us. Emily is a second-year student at Lincoln College and is going to be sharing with us what the Christian faith means to her and the effect that it's had on her life. Please join me in welcoming Emily.
Thank you so much, Ellie. Well, as you all should guess from the fact I'm standing here, I am a Christian, but that wasn't always the case. Growing up, I had so much. I had the most incredible education. I had impeccable mental and physical health. I had the most lovely, close friends. I have the most wonderful family. My mum and dad are so loving and kind and generous. I have 3 fantastic siblings. I know that no one's life is perfect, but I basically thought mine was. I honestly thought that religion was a crutch for people who were lacking something in their lives, which was lovely for them, but not something that I wanted or needed or believed in. When I got here, however, I made friends with a girl called Amy, who was a Christian. And in our second term last year, she began inviting me to Christian events. She took me to her baptism and to a service at St. Aldate's Church. Both times I was really struck by the emotion. I'd never seen that in a church before. But I found the whole experience really quite embarrassing. I felt out of place. I felt like I was intruding on a private, secret moment. So when she invited me this time last year to Mission Week to hear Tim Keller speak, I didn't really want to go. But at the last minute, something made me change my mind. And I ended up listening to him speak on Satisfaction one Wednesday evening. In preparation for tonight, I looked up what he actually said that night. His main message was that we're made to be in a relationship with God, and that it is only in the person of Jesus that we can find ultimate fulfillment. But that's not what I took away from the evening. What I took away was the one tiny moment when he challenged my belief that I could find ultimate and deep fulfillment in a human relationship. Until then, I'd basically been living to find a boyfriend. I joked with friends about being single, but alone I fantasized about telling them about the amazing relationship I was in. I read explicit fan fiction, which I couldn't give up. I used to go to social events just to meet guys. It didn't make me happy. I returned to the next Tim Keller talk, and the next, and it turned out that Christianity didn't just challenge my worldview, it offered a replacement. He spoke on freedom and identity. The life he described was so appealing. It so far trumped the life I was currently living. The people I spoke to at the talk were so lovely and open and genuine. I was really, really interested. But I didn't believe in God yet. So I returned to St. Aldate's with Amy to church. Now, however, everything was different. Now I wanted faith. And as God has done ever since, he came through utterly. It took a couple of weeks of listening to sermons, mouthing along to the words, trying to fit it in. But by the end of 2 weeks, I knew that God existed, that he was real, that I was deeply loved. It turns out I was right all along. I did need a relationship, but not a human one. What I found in my relationship with God surpasses anything I ever fantasized about. 1 John 4:8 says, God is love, and that's what he's been in my life. He has brought me so much peace. Peace about all the things I used to worry about work, about my grades, about being single, about being away from home, about speaking in public. But he's also brought me peace about the biggest things. I finally found peace with who I am. I am loved by God. I was created by him. I am defined by my relationship with him. And that knowledge brings me so much freedom and so much joy. Of course, I still have struggles. Life isn't easy, and I don't think it's supposed to be. There are days when I feel far from God, and times when I can't quite believe that Jesus Christ actually died on the cross to take my guilt away. But God has been so faithful and so patient and so loving. I've only been a Christian for a year, and I'm still discovering more and more about him, but the more I discover, the more and more I fall in love with him. I thought a lot about what I wanted this testimony to be tonight, when Oiki gave me the chance to give it. I started out thinking, what could I say that would make everyone in this room want to become a Christian who isn't already? But the God I know and the God I love doesn't need me to seek the approval of the world. So instead, I want to make this a testimony I never got to thank the Christian Union for everything they gave last year, and I want to thank everyone who is still here this year for all the things they gave, for all the time, the money, the effort they put in, for all the ways they prayed last year for Mission Week. Thank you so much. I want to thank my incredible friend Amy, who is more like a sister to me now. She showed me through her life what it is to be a Christian and to love God. I want to thank all my other friends, I can't name you all, but you're all amazing. Above all, I want to thank God. He has been so patient and so loving and so generous. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. I'm sure Emily would be really happy to share more of her story with you if you'd like to chat with her afterwards. Next, we're going to watch a video exploring the reliability of John's Gospel, where our reading is from this evening.
Can we trust John's Gospel? The Christian faith is founded on historical evidence. Ancient writers like Josephus and Tacitus testify to Jesus Christ's undeniable impact on world history. But John's Gospel goes one better. It presents itself as an eyewitness record of Jesus' life, someone writing down what he actually saw and heard. That would make it key evidence to assess who Jesus of Nazareth is and what he offers. But can we trust it? In the ancient world, manuscripts were copied by hand. Producing them was time-consuming and costly, and the vast majority of what was written does not survive. But the New Testament writings are an exception, and among them John's Gospel is one of the best attested. We can trace the whole book back to the 4th century with no obvious gaps, with a wealth of earlier material before then as well. In fact, if you visit the University of Manchester's Rylands Library, you can find the earliest surviving fragment of the New Testament. It's from John's Gospel, and it dates all the way back to the 2nd century. So today's printed editions have extensive and early manuscript support, but can we believe that this book was written by a contemporary eyewitness of Jesus? We know that it was being read, quoted and alluded to by many in the 2nd century. To achieve such early widespread circulation, it must have been written in the 1st century. The early church writers, as well as the earliest manuscripts, all attribute it to John, one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Within the book itself, the author is familiar with things that only a local could know. For example, he writes about a pool with 5 colonnades in Jerusalem, but Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. The pool would have been unknown to someone writing later. It was only rediscovered in the 19th century. Many scholars date the writing of John's Gospel to around AD 90. It's only separated from the events it describes by 60 years. That's roughly the same time span between us today and Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. And there are tens of thousands of eyewitnesses from that time alive today. We have good reason to take John's Gospel seriously as an eyewitness record of Jesus' life. So why not read it for yourself? Why not see what you make of this biography of Jesus Christ?
This evening's reading is going to be taken from the purple book that you see on your chair, and we're going to be looking at John chapter 9, which is on page 54. That's page 54, starting John chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming, when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him, "wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went, washed, and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they asked. And he replied, "The man they call Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. "He put mud on my eyes," the man replied, "and I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes that he opened." And the man replied, "He is a prophet." They still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight, until they sent for the man's parents. "Is this your son?" they asked. "Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see?" "We know he is our son," the parents answered, "and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who already had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. And that was why his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." A second time they summoned the man who had been blind. "Give glory to God by telling the truth," they said. "We know this man is a sinner." He replied, "Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see." Then they asked him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" And he answered, "I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" Then they hurled insults at him and said, "You are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." To this they replied, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." And then the man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this, and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you can see, your guilt remains."
Thank you very much for giving up your Thursday evening to hear me address this topic of leadership in colour. Can I trust Jesus not to wreck my life? And that was a very important question for me looking into Christian things. I went to university, like Emily, as an unbeliever. I was quite sceptical about Christian claims. And then over the course of my second term, I became gradually convinced that there was more evidence for Christianity than I had thought. I had assumed growing up that Christianity really was essentially an aesthetic. You know, do you like organ music and stained glass windows? And the answer was not particularly. Or maybe I thought it was an ethic. You know, do you agree that Jesus' teaching is a good way to live? And the answer was yes, except for the areas where I disagree with him. So I just assumed it was that sort of subjective thing. But I met some Christian friends at university who didn't fit into my stereotype of Christians. I thought that Christians were, I would never have put it quite this rudely, but I basically thought they were gullible hypocrites. Gullible because I'd never heard anyone give me a reason why to believe, and hypocrites because, well, growing up in my village church, I knew sometimes the sort of two-faced nature of people who would scrub up on a Sunday and look lovely and then live the same as everyone else. I met Christians at university who weren't like that. They weren't gullible, they were more intelligent than me, many of them, and they weren't hypocrites. They lived their lives in a very distinctive way, following the teaching of Jesus. And they told me about some of the evidence for Jesus, some of the eyewitness documents, some of the rational arguments, and I gradually became more and more convinced it was probably true, but I didn't want it to be true. Because my fear was that Jesus was going to wreck my life, that following him would turn everything not into colour, but into monochrome. I thought he would curtail my freedom, I thought he would put an end to my ambitions, and so I feared it, and so I avoided coming to something like this. So if you're here, against your will, reluctantly dragged, then well done for being brave enough. I used to find reasons to have an essay crisis at precisely the times that I knew that the KICU, the equivalent in Cambridge, were going to invite me to their talks, because I didn't have a good reason not to believe, except that I didn't want to. Maybe that's you tonight. Maybe you're beginning to be persuaded that there are good reasons for following Jesus, that there are good reasons for believing that he is real and truly God, perhaps, but you just fear that you can't trust him. Just before we dive into John's Gospel, I want to read you some classic words of the rock star Bob Dylan. I won't try and sing it, but I'll read it to you. You may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble. You might like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. You may be a socialite with a long string of pearls. But you're going to have to serve somebody. Yeah. You're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. You may be a state trooper, you may be a young Turk, you may be the head of some big TV network, you may be rich or poor, you may be blind or lame, you may be living in another country under another name, but you're going to have to serve somebody, indeed. You're going to have to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're going to have to serve somebody. Profound words, I think, because actually that's true of all of us. Leadership is a given in this world. I know much the idea of our culture is autonomy. I'll serve nobody but myself. That may be your ideal, but it's not going to be your reality, I'm sorry to say. None of us live an autonomous existence, and if we all did, then the results would be pretty ugly. Anarchy is not a particularly pleasant place to live. But we all live in nations, we live in nations with governments, and the government that rules you can have a profound effect on your life. If you were born in Germany in the 1930s, or if you were born in China in the 1950s, or Syria in the 1990s, then about your age you would face incredible changes imposed upon you by those who led you. Maybe we're lucky to have the government we have in this country at the moment. Soon you're going to graduate, you'll get a job, and in many ways the quality of your life will depend on the relationship with the person who is your boss or your line manager. I can remember 2 jobs in my life that I absolutely hated. One of them, when I was about 14, was at the co-op. My mum told me I had to go and get a job. My pocket money was ending, and so she basically pressured me into getting this awful job at the co-op. And I hated it because it was boring, but worse than that, the manager was the father of the guy that I worked with who's my age. And he used to get shameful favouritism all the way through. So I don't know if you've ever shelf-stacked in a supermarket, but basically the very best thing to be on is the toilet roll aisle. because toilet rolls come in packs of 24 or 48 huge packs. You just have to put about 4 of them on the shelf and the whole aisle is done, and they weigh nothing. He always got the toilet roll. I always got the dog food. I hated that job, and I hated the bullying that went with it. A few years later, I was in a job that was even more difficult because of a toxic relationship with my line manager. Maybe you'll face that. The quality of life will depend on whom you follow. But maybe more significant than either of those, more significant than your government, more significant than your employer, is your choice of role model. Who you trust to lead you in the ultimate questions of life. And again, maybe some of you in this culture say, oh, well, I only trust myself. And I wonder whether that isn't the most foolish and naive answer of all. Do you really trust yourself that much? Given that you know how finite you are and how fallible you are. Well, most of us are wiser than that. Most of us look for somebody to follow. And this passage we're about to look at in Jesus' teaching contains a warning that he gives about that choice. A warning about our choice of who to follow. And I'm actually going to read from the chapter after the one we just heard, although we're going to dip back into chapter 9 in a moment. So open your little John's Gospels again at page 60. And basically what I'm planning to do this evening is just to give you Jesus' teaching as we have it, straight from John the Eyewitness. So I'm not going to particularly dress it up or say anything especially clever. I'm just going to talk us through these words so we understand what's being said. And you take it home and you open it up again, and it will say the same stuff that I said tonight, and you can continue to think about it. But we're in chapter 10 now, page 60, bottom paragraph of the page. And Jesus describes us as sheep, which maybe isn't very flattering, but that's an image often used in the Bible of human beings. Let's pick up at verse 7, so bottom paragraph on page 60. Jesus said, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who've come before me are thieves and robbers. The sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They'll come in and go out and find pasture. The thief only comes to kill and steal and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd, he doesn't own the sheep, so when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. Well, it's a simple enough metaphor, except that John changes it halfway through. We are sheep. Jesus is the gate. He is the way in to a wonderful place. He's the way into what he calls, in last night's talk, the kingdom of God. It's the way into what he calls here, being saved, being rescued. He describes it as finding pasture, which, let's face it, if you're a sheep, is what you really want to do. He describes it as finding life and having life to the full. In other words, Jesus says, I haven't come to make your life monochrome and grey. I've come to give you life in colour. Life with messed up things sorted out. Life in a relationship with a God who loves you. Life that won't end in death. Life that carries on for eternity. Life to the full. And I'm the gate. I'm the way into that. You've got to come through me. Then he changes the metaphor and says, I'm the shepherd. I'm the one who will guide you successfully through the gate, which is also me. So two metaphors in one person. He's the gate and the shepherd. But basically, he's the one you need to get in. But then notice there's a warning. Because the shepherd and the gate are not the only characters in Jesus' analogy. There's also a thief and a hired hand. And Jesus says, be careful. Make sure that you don't end up following one of them. You see, the thief, well, it's pretty stupid, isn't it, if you're a sheep to follow a thief, because you'll be a roast dinner by Sunday. The thief comes to steal and kill and destroy. He serves himself, he deceives you, and he'll wreck your life for his own advantage. Be careful of the thief. And then there's the hired hand, and the hired hand's better than the thief because he's on your side, but only as far as it goes. He's just a temp, he's just hiding for the job, so he's happy to do a bit of shepherding unless things get dangerous. And if a wolf turns up, he goes, look, this is more than my pay's worth, mate. And he leaves you alone, and so the wolf comes and ravages you. So the thief's out to get you, and the hired hand will let you down. Jesus says, be careful. As you choose your role model, as you choose your leaders in this world, you can't trust all of them. Now, I think that would be okay. If Jesus was just to give that advice, you think, fair enough. If he said, I'm one of the good shepherds, and there are others, and there are some rogue shepherds, you go, yeah, I'm happy with that. But Jesus goes one step further, and this is where what he says becomes offensive, I think, in our culture. Because Jesus says quite universally, I am the gate and the shepherd. And then look at the bottom of page 60, verse 8, little number 8 at the bottom paragraph. All who've come before me are thieves and robbers. It's quite extreme, isn't it? Not I'm one of the shepherds, and if you should happen to want to follow the shepherd Muhammad, then great, go that way. Or maybe you prefer the shepherd Buddha, and that's okay. Or maybe you prefer the shepherds of the atheists, like Richard Dawkins, and great for you. And if you happen to like the particular Christian brand of spirituality, then I can offer you some pretty good grazing land, and you could choose to come after me. Okay, great, that's what our culture says. But Jesus goes further. He says, you can trust me, and you can't trust any of them. All who came before are thieves and robbers. So I'm the shepherd you can trust, and every other shepherd will let you down. Either because they're hostile to you, or because they're on your side, but it only goes so far. And then when real danger comes, when it comes to it, they'll let you down. I did a talk a bit like this at Durham University a few years ago, and we did a vox pop in the street saying, who do you trust? Who would you trust with your life? And touchingly, most people said, my mum. So, it's sweet, isn't it? I trust my mum. I think I'd say the same. But, my mum even. One day she'll die, probably before I do. And then she won't be able to be my shepherd anymore. I'll be on my own. Jesus says, ultimately, every other leader will let you down one way or the other. So be careful who you choose. Now, Jesus was speaking originally to Jewish people, and they would have recognised in Jesus' metaphor a picture from the prophet Ezekiel, maybe hundreds of years before the coming of Jesus, in the Old Testament scriptures. And God had spoken through the prophet Ezekiel about the leadership of his day. He describes them as shepherds. He has in mind the kings of the country, the government of the country, and the priests, the spiritual leaders, or supposedly spiritual leaders of the country. And he says this, I am against you, shepherds, says the Lord. The weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, the strayed you have not brought back, the lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. They were scattered, there was no shepherd, they became food for the wild beasts. My sheep were scattered, they wandered over the mountains, over every high hill. My sheep were scattered over all the face of the earth, with none to search for them. Woe to you, shepherds, who feed only yourself. My sheep have become a prey. There was no shepherd. God is saying that the leadership of that country of Israel before Jesus had failed people. They'd been self-serving. Or maybe we can identify the same contours in our own recent political history. Think of things like the MP's expenses scandal. They supposedly public servants end up with a second home and extra income and doing very nicely out of it. And just the shock and outrage that caused. Or think of some of the scandals to do with police corruption recently, both here and in the United States. Or think of the scandals about the newspapers and phone tapping and invasions of privacy. And actually, in the last decade, almost every office of leadership has been questioned. So often self-serving, with not really much of a thought for those supposedly they lead. You could the entertainment business, the great rock stars, the role models like Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris. And Jesus says, watch out. Be careful whom you follow. There is the thief and the robber. But Ezekiel, the prophet, went on. He says, this is what God says. Behold, I myself will search for my sheep and will seek them out. I will bring them out. I will gather them. I will bring them into their own land. I will feed them with good pasture. Then they shall lie down in good grazing land, and rich pasture they shall feed. I myself will be the shepherd of the sheep, and I myself will make them lie down, declares the Lord. I will seek the lost. I will bring back the strayed. I will bind up the injured. I will strengthen the weak. I will feed them in justice. God's saying, I've had enough of leaders who abuse people. And so I'm going to do the job myself. Well, that's the background. And as I say, Jesus' audience being Jews, they'd have understood that. They'd have recognised his analogy. And so when he says, I am the good shepherd, do you see what an extraordinary claim he's making? Prophet Ezekiel said, God, the God who's the creator of the world, is going to be the leader. And Jesus says, hi. Here I am. Almost blasphemous, isn't it, for a Jew to hear that? I am the shepherd. And you might think, well, okay, great PR, Jesus. Find the ancient prophecy, say the right things, very moving, tugs on the heartstrings. Here we're very impressed by your skills at politics. But actually, Jesus doesn't just make claims in this book, he does stuff to back up his claims. And what I want us to do now is to go back into the previous chapter, chapter 9, and look at some of the evidence that Jesus gives that he actually is that kind of shepherd. He actually is God, and he really can be trusted to treat people properly. The way it works in this gospel is Jesus does various extraordinary miracles. They're called signs, and then after a sign he gives the explanation. So we just read the explanation, but earlier we heard the sign, this opening the eyes of the blind man. And John says right at the end of his book that he's recorded the signs that ought to convince us that Jesus really is the Messiah, the Son of God. What I love about this book is John, the guy who wrote it, was a follower of Jesus. And that was a pretty risky thing to do. So in those days, Christians didn't live in big bishops' palaces and have cathedrals at their disposal. In those days, Christians were a persecuted minority who lived in poverty and were despised by many people. And John was one of those people, and he faced all kinds of persecutions and an exile later in his life. And I would suggest to you he did that because he was pretty convinced that Jesus was worth following. John himself put his money where his mouth was. And this is a book where he shows us the things that persuaded him. I said to someone yesterday, people do die for causes that aren't true. People die in all sorts of causes. But I think it's very unusual, outside psychiatric wards, to find people dying for causes that they know aren't true. And one of the things that convinces me about the New Testament is that the people who put their life on the line for it, people like John and the others, are in a position to know whether it was true, because they're there. See the logic? John would know if it happened if he was there, and on the basis of being convinced it did happen, he's prepared to be a witness to it. Well, anyway, as I say, this book is full of miracles. I also mentioned last night, as a science student, miracles used to be a real problem for me. I thought they were impossible, they can't have happened. And then I thought about it a bit more philosophically, and I realised actually the absence of miracles would be more of a problem. If I were to say to you, oh, by the way, I'm God, and I'm afraid I can't do anything that anyone else in the Sheldonian can't do. But trust me, I really am. I would find that more suspicious. If somebody really is God, walking around in human flesh, I would expect them to do unusual things, like being able to turn water into wine and mess with the fundamental laws of chemistry, or to be able to walk on water at room temperature and mess with physics, or be able to open the eyes of a man born blind and so mess with biology. And then I think, maybe you are God. if that really happened. Well, there we are. Chapter 9. Let's look at what happens and what convinces him. And I think as we do so, we'll see some of the evidence for Jesus, and we'll see some of the character of Jesus as a shepherd. So basically, I want to take you through the chapter right at the beginning of chapter 9. So turn over a couple of pages to page 54. And let me just go over the story again in brief. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" So they've got this assumption, shared by many people in the world today, that if you're suffering more, it's because God's out to get you back for something. Basically what Hinduism believes, the principle of karma. If we were to line everyone the Sheldonian up, I know I said this last night, but this time on a scale of who's suffering the most. So those with the easiest lives at that end, and those who've had the toughest time of Michaelmas term at that end. Jesus, many people assume that somehow corresponds with the people that God likes the most, people that God likes the least, or people who've lived the best, and people who've lived the worst. And Jesus says, no, it doesn't work like that. You're asking the wrong question, you're making the wrong assumption. This man isn't particularly worse than anyone else. It's just that God has special purposes for his life. And then Jesus comes up to the man, spits on the ground, makes some mud, put it on the man's eyes, says, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam." He went and washed and came home, and he could see. Pretty impressive miracle. But what I love about the miracle this time is that there's a full-scale investigation of it. So this isn't just something, that I could say, I just did a miracle and I'm afraid I was on my own. Sorry you didn't get to see it, but I had a really sore back and I don't now. So, I'm God. It's not very convincing, is it? This was done in public, and then it gets carefully investigated. And it gets investigated even by people hostile to Jesus' cause. So it begins with the people from the town, and they're going, "Isn't that the bloke who used to beg because he was blind?" And I think it is, yeah, but they don't understand what's happened because he can see, and so the gossip goes round. But then it gets to the religious HQ, the Jewish high command, the Pharisees. And so they bring him before them, and they begin their investigation. Verse 15, middle of page 56. The Pharisees also asked him how he'd received his sight. Simply enough, he says, "He put mud on my eyes, I washed, and now I can see." Some of the Pharisees says, this man, Jesus, isn't from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. Now this was a Jewish law that says you shouldn't do any work on Saturdays, and they're pretty upset with Jesus, and actually all the way through the gospel they get upset, because Jesus does healings on Saturdays, and they count that as work, and so they think that he's breaking the law. It's not really work, all he does is make some mud, and then puts it. So it's not like he spends the whole day in surgery and ophthalmic hospital, but anyway, they get upset about it. Others say, how can a sinner perform such signs? So there was confusion. Can't make up their mind about it. So they investigate further. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man says, well, maybe he's a prophet. But they didn't believe he'd been blind and received his sight, so they get the guy's parents in. So in come the guy's parents and they say, what happened? Is he your son? Is this the one that you say was born blind? It's getting a bit ridiculous at this point, because obviously these parents know, because they've been guiding him through his infancy and he can't see anything. So they go, well, yeah. He was blind and now he can see, and you'll have to ask him why it happened, because they're scared of the intimidation by the religious authorities. So they get the guy in again, but notice that they're becoming more entrenched in their position because they've already decided the answer they want to hear. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they say. We know this man is a sinner. In other words, we've already decided that Jesus is a bad guy. So go on, do the dirty on him. And the guy says, look, all I can tell you is the facts. I used to be blind, but now I can see. Well, how? How did it happen, they say? Well, he told you once, he said, do you want me to tell you again? Do you want to become his disciples? And then they become abusive. You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they throw him out. Now, notice, I think this is quite terrifying actually. Notice what's happened. There's objective evidence, pretty clear to everybody involved. The man, yes, he was blind. All his people in his town, isn't that the guy who used to be blind? His parents, they should know he used to be blind, and now he can see. So it's pretty obvious what's happened. But the Pharisees have already decided that Jesus is to be rejected. He doesn't fit their categories. He doesn't dance to their tune. And so at first the evidence is confusing, and the clearer the evidence becomes, the more entrenched they become. And so their only alternative is just to become abusive to the witness. Imagine a court case that went like this. You interview the eyewitness, and he doesn't give you the answer that you want, and so you start hurling abuse at him. Well, hopefully in a British court of law, the judge will at that point stop you and say, stop hectoring that's just in Hollywood, stop hectoring the witness. But they just become abusive because they've already decided in advance of the evidence, and so the evidence itself makes absolutely no difference to them. Now I say that's frightening because I recognise myself in that. As I looked at Jesus, it became increasingly clear that somebody who really did these sorts of things in front of eyewitnesses must be God. But I didn't want him to be God. I didn't want it to be true. I thought it would mess up my life. And so I found more and more ridiculous reasons for avoiding it. I used to ask questions, you're going to ask a question in a minute, but my questions became more and more ridiculous. I just designed to be the slate screen to enable me to slip out the back and not have to face up to it. And even better than asking questions was just not to come. So I came to a couple of these sorts of meetings in my first year, and then I found it when they were on, and I went to the library instead with a ready-made physiology essay crisis, which invariably coincided with the talk. I think it's very easy, isn't it, to come to the evidence with a ready-made conclusion that has nothing to do with the evidence itself. I think Richard Dawkins is guilty of that, by the way, in The God Delusion. He talks about the resurrection of Jesus only once, and goes on to say that it either happened or didn't happen, and can't have happened, because by the nature of the case, it's in contradiction with the laws of science. It's not really how science works, is it? You don't find the exceptional result and say the exceptional result didn't happen, so it doesn't fit the theory. You go, the exceptional result means I've got to revise my theory. But he's already decided, I'm an atheist, and if there's no God, then there's no miracles. It becomes slightly circular, doesn't it? Are you willing to look at the evidence objectively? But here's the warning from Jesus, right at the end of chapter 9. Jesus says, "For judgment I've come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Be careful. If you're on that trajectory, that the clearer things become to you, the more entrenched you get, then where's it going to end up? You'll end up so blinded to the evidence, so deafened to it, that no amount of further evidence will ever be able to get through. What will be the solution? More evidence? No. The more evidence, the more you run. The more blind you become. Be careful, says Jesus. But then, interestingly, Jesus isn't just speaking against the atheist. He's not just speaking against the other religious, the teacher of another religion. He is warning us against the fake Jewish teacher, the fake Christian teacher. Pharisees were the establishment that were meant to be God's people, and yet they were against him. Let me read you a poem that I rather like by a guy called Steve Turner, a Christian poet. There were people after Jesus. They've seen the signs. Quick, let's hide him. Let's think, carpenter, fisherman's friend, disturber of religious comfort. Let's award him a degree in theology, a purple cassock, and a position of respect. They'll never think of looking here. Let's think his dialect may betray him, his tongue is of the masses. Let's teach him Latin and 17th century English. They'll never think of listening in. Let's think humble, man of sorrows, nowhere to lay his head. We'll build a house for him, somewhere away from the poor. We'll fill it with grass and silence. It's sure to throw them off. There are people after Jesus. Quick, let's hide him. You'll find actually as you begin to look at Jesus that religious people won't always be the most helpful. Sometimes actually they'll treat you the way that these leaders treated this blind man. Maybe, let's imagine you come to this talk tonight and maybe you're interested by it. I don't know if you are, but let's imagine you are. You go back to college and you say, I've been going to these talks, everything in colour, about Jesus, and you know what? I'm starting to think that Jesus might be for real. And I'm finding him very attractive. You'll find that some people who themselves are hiding will become towards you quite abusive. They'll deride you, as a mechanism really for keeping their own distance. They'll abuse you, they'll shut their ears to the evidence. And religious people could be among the worst. That was certainly my experience as I tried to get close. Well, I think it's obvious that these teachers, as far as shepherds go, are pretty shameful. Supposed to be the pastors, the shepherds of the people of God. But instead they hector the guy's parents, they hurl insults at him, and they stick their fingers in their ears. What about Jesus then? How does Jesus come out of the chapter? Well, Jesus, I think, performs two miracles. He opens the man's eyes physically, a miracle involving his retina or his optic nerve or something like that, and he can see. But also Jesus opens his eyes spiritually. I wonder if you just look through the chapter and see how the man moves. First it's this guy, the man they call Jesus. We know who he is, has done it. And then he goes, well, maybe he's a prophet or something. And then finally he says, I believe that he is the Son of Man, the Messiah, the one from God. What is it that causes this man to move from agnosticism to faith? Well, partly it's the Pharisees actually today, because they keep asking these questions and he goes over in his head and he works it out. Hang on a minute, this guy did something pretty amazing. He can't just be he must be from God. But partly it's the miracle whereby Jesus opens his eyes. Which kind of shepherd would you want to follow? Would you want to follow the religious teachers who are self-serving? The people who are hiding from the light because they're scared of what Jesus might expose in them? Or this gracious shepherd who heals him, opens his eyes, and treats him with graciousness all the way through? Jesus says, be careful who you follow. And then in chapter 10, Jesus gives one more reason why he's the better shepherd. So just turn over the page one last time, over to page 61. And once again, someone's highlighted this in all the copies. This is the printer, helpfully. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. This is how you know that I'm committed to you. I tell you the truth. I open your eyes. I treat you with honesty and graciousness. And then when push comes to shove, I'm prepared to die for you. I'll give up my own life in sacrifice for you so you can enter through the gate and be saved. We looked at this last night, and here it is again, this motif. Jesus chooses to give up his own life for the sake of anyone who would trust him. He dies the penalty, he bears the penalty that I should bear for my rebellion against God. He pays the consequences that I owe for the evil that I've done. And so opens up the way for forgiveness and pasture and life and relationship forever. I'd say that was the final bit of logic for me. I remember thinking, I dare not come near Jesus. I dare not hand over the control of my life to him because he might stuff it up. And then I just thought about it and think, Andy, why would Jesus die for you in order to wreck your life? It doesn't make sense, does it? I mean, he must in some ways be for you in quite a dramatic way. He must want good for you to pay such a price as that. I thought about my Christian friends. I thought, well, he hasn't wrecked their lives. And they live differently because they follow him. But it seems that not only is he true, he can do miracles, there's evidence and so forth, but he's also good. And so I can trust him. I'm giving your life to someone. It's quite scary, isn't it? I mean, it is the most valuable thing that you have. Worth hesitating about. Don't make a decision like this quickly. But I'd suggest to you that this shepherd is the shepherd that you can trust. And as he warns us, all others will let you down. The thief and the robber, they're out for themselves. The hired hand, he'll help you up to a point, but when he gets tough, he'll run away. But I'll stick with you through thick and thin. I'll even die for you. So this is the gate. Here is the shepherd. Come through me and receive life to the full. Well, I want to ask you to pick up one of these response cards. You'll find one on your seat. We'd love to know what you've made of this evening. Just your feedback and your thoughts and your questions. Let me just explain to you some of the boxes here. If you want us to get back to you, obviously please give us your contact details. Obviously we can't guess who you are. But you might want to say at the bottom there, I have a question or a comment. If you write a question and you tell us how to get in touch, then we will be within 24 hours with our best attempt at an answer. Maybe it will come with, I could meet you or somebody else can meet you and try and answer your question. If you want to hear about future events, then we'll email you, we'll tell you about this course we just saw the video about in Starbucks starting on Monday. You'd be very welcome to come to that. Number two, particularly want to recommend to you, I want to read Uncover John with somebody. Now, here's my suggestion. I made this suggestion yesterday. Why not? This is the eyewitness biography of Jesus by somebody who actually knew him. We've looked at 2 chapters of it tonight. There's 21 chapters altogether. Why not start at the beginning, read chapter 1, put a tick against everything you agree with, a cross against everything you disagree with, and underline anything you didn't understand, and then meet a Christian and say, can I go through chapter 1 with you if you buy me a coffee? And because the Christian's a Christian, they'll say, yeah. So you get a free coffee and you go through your annotations. And if it's useful, then do the same thing for chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, maximum 21 coffees. And if at any point it stops being useful, then you leave it there. So you've got nothing to lose apart from, half an hour reading, thinking a bit, and then a free coffee. And please do something like that rather than just shelve things. One of the most important things you might have ever heard this evening. Be ashamed just to let Oxford life get carried away. Exams, job, career, children, retirement, dead. And you never thought about it again. You laugh, but that's very possible actually. It's very possible. So decide now not to shelve it and to have a look at the evidence. But it might be that somebody here, maybe you've heard more than just this evening, maybe you've been coming along all of this week, maybe you've been talking to Christian friends for some time. And you think, look, I know that Jesus is true. The evidence is compelling to me. But also I've become convinced that he's good. And I can even trust him with the most precious thing I have, my life. And you'd like to do that this evening. If you'd like to, I want to say a quick prayer that you could echo in your heart and begin to follow this shepherd right this evening. So let's just all close our eyes for the respect for those who want to. And if you'd like to pray, just echo this in your heart. God knows our thoughts and he will hear your prayer. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for Jesus, the Good Shepherd. Thank you for the evidence in history of his miracles. And I am persuaded that he really is the Son of God. Thank you for his character, that I can trust him, that not to just serve himself and let me down, but thank you that he is lovingly committed to his people. And thank you that he laid down his life for the sheep, that anyone who trusts him could be forgiven through his death. Please help me to start to follow him from tonight, to place my life in his hands, my decisions in his hands, and thank you for his promise that he will lead me to life to the full. Amen.
Andrew is going to come back up now to answer some of our questions. So if you've texted in a question, they should be appearing on the screen. You said that I can't trust myself to run my own life, but it's working out quite well so far. Why would anything change?
Okay, well, I applaud your self-confidence and self-reliance, but I think it is misplaced. I think there are at least two things in your life that you're not in control of. One is your death. So these are at the very least. I suspect there's one or more. And in my own life, there's lots of stupid decisions I made and continue to make. But at the very least, your death. Most of us will not choose to die, and those who do, how very tragic that will be. Most of us will not be in control of that. We don't decide how many breaths we take. And we won't be in control of the verdict on the judgment day about ourselves. That will be God's decision, and he will decide where we spend eternity. So at the very minimum about those two decisions, you need somebody else to get you through them. But I suggest actually, in the rest of life, we can make quite a few decisions also. Well done if you've not made any yet, but maybe that's misplaced self-confidence.
There are plenty of people who are Christians who haven't been healed like that blind man was. Why? Why is him healing a select few a reason to trust him not to wreck my life?
Yeah, thank you. So, and that's a very helpful question, a perceptive question, because Christianity isn't promising to fix everything that might be wrong with our lives right now. So there are blind Christians. One of my friends is a Christian in a wheelchair, and one of the much-loved ladies in my church is a Christian with cancer. She's dying this year, basically, so she's just starting her second round of chemo, but it's not chemo to cure it, it's just chemo to make it hurt less in the last year of her life. She's a Christian, but she's still got cancer. So you're right to say the Christian message isn't God will sort out your cancer, he'll sort out your blindness, he'll get you a job, he'll make the girl of your dreams say yes, etc., etc. It's not about everything sorted out in this life. Jesus' promises are about fullness of life. He says, I'll give you life to the full. But in particular, that promise has got a future dimension to it. He calls it eternal life. He calls it escaping from the condemnation of Judgment Day. He talks about the kingdom of God, which in the Bible is this future world where everything is fixed. So the Christian hopes for this heaven or this new creation in the future, but on the basis of demonstrations in history of God's ability to pull it off. And so John himself, the author, he calls Jesus' miracles signs. The first one, he says, this is the first of his signs he does. And then on page 118, don't bother turning to it, he says, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which aren't recorded in this book, but these ones are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you have life in his name. So here is evidence to persuade you of Jesus' ability to bring this future world. So they're sort of indicative. You know, Jesus promises to get me through death. How do I know he can get me through death? In chapter 11, he's got a bloke through Lazarus through death. Now I call that precedent. Scientifically. He's done it once. I'm now more persuaded he can do it again. But Jesus says he can sort out sickness. How do I know? Well, here's a guy who was quadriplegic for 48 years, who's now able to walk. Here's a man who was blind from birth, who's now able to see. So it's evidence, indicative evidence, to persuade me. It's not just empty words. He's proved it. But it's a sign of what he will do ultimately at the end of history when he comes in judgment? So, very good question, very perceptive question. I think one resurrection is going to persuade me that he can do more of them. But he said you've got to wait for the last day, but on the basis of the past, you can trust it.
Thank you. Was Jesus talking about Muhammad as one of the rogue shepherds who had come before, as he came about 5 centuries later?
Thank you for that rather pointed question. No, Jesus wasn't referring to Muhammad, but he was making a very universal statement. So all who came before me were thieves and robbers. I am the shepherd, the gate. And actually, tomorrow lunchtime would be great to come to, where Michael Ramsden is going to look at this specific question. Is Jesus being black and white? Can we trust him to make such exclusive claims? And actually, you'll find that they sort of go all the way through the Gospel. So in chapter 14, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Fair enough, we like that, you know, I'm the way if you want to follow it. But he goes further, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody can come to the Father except by me. So he's referring, of course, not to Muhammad, but to past and contemporary alternatives. But I'm sure he would make the same claim about Muhammad, because Muhammad is saying here's a different way to God other than by Jesus. And Jesus says there isn't one. But more about that tomorrow lunchtime, and Michael will be addressing that specifically.
Great. I think we have time for one final question. Is there a question from the floor that we could finish with? Just raise your hand and I'll come with the mic. No? Okay, we'll go for one from the screen. What does it mean for a Christian to live differently?
Thanks very much. Well, I mean, I think tonight the fundamental answer is it means to follow this shepherd. So the idea of a shepherd is, I mean, if you're a sheep, it's not very flattering as a sheep. As a sheep, you don't make your own decisions. You follow the decisions of your shepherd. So it's quite a humbling thing, and it means giving up your own autonomy and putting your life in Jesus' hands and saying, look, Jesus, from now on, I'm going to do what you say. I remember doing it myself. I was very scared of it, actually. I've heard this a bit already tonight. Can I trust him? Even when I decided logically that I could trust him, it was still quite a scary decision. I remember that point when I said, Jesus, from now on, when you and I disagree about something, I'm going to try and go with what you say rather than what I say. I'm giving up independence in favour of trusting you. And this is quite the answer to the person who says, I've been following myself for the last how many years, it's gone fine. A Christian is somebody who makes a change and says, I'm not following me anymore, I'm following you. And actually, to get to that point, you've got to basically say, Jesus, I trust you with my life more than I trust me with it. And that's quite a scary decision. But it seems to me a wise one, because I can't get me through death, and I can't get me through God's judgment, and I can't even live up to my own ideals. I'm constantly falling short. I can't clean up my own act. I find all sorts of ugliness inside. So I'm saying to Jesus, look, it didn't really work with me running the life, so I'm going to let you run it, and I'm going to follow you. So it means listening to what he says, and following his way, and believing his promise that because he laid down his life for us, he can be the gate through which we will find life to the full.
Great. Thank you so much.